"I deserve this more, sweetheart," Mom stated, without even glancing up from the stack of elegant cupcakes she was positioning on the tiered display. Jessica has consistently shown greater commitment to her academics. You've always pursued various other passions. The offhand rejection hurt more than a physical blow. I remained in my parents' kitchen, my medical school certification still pristine in its frame, attempting to comprehend what I had just heard. "Mom, we both achieved honors. Our GPAs were identical," I said, my voice unwavering, though my hands trembled slightly. "I'm confused as to why you and Dad would settle all of Jessica's debts but none of mine." "Audrey," my mother sighed, finally meeting my gaze with that characteristic look of gentle disapproval. "Your sister lacks a prosperous benefactor like Dr. Flemington, who is invested in her career. You've consistently possessed opportunities Jessica did not." I nearly scoffed. Dr. Vivian Fleming was my research supervisor because I had merited that role through 80-hour work weeks in the laboratory, while Jessica was enjoying skiing trips in Aspen with our parents. The opportunity had been exhausting myself, while my twin sister benefited from our parents' constant emotional and monetary backing. "So, I'm being penalized for securing my own mentorship prospects?" I inquired, striving to conceal the pain in my voice. My father entered, wrapping an arm around my mother's shoulders. "Nobody is penalizing you, Audrey. We're simply being sensible. Your sister requires greater assistance than you do. You've consistently demonstrated more ingenuity." Ingenuity, the term they employed to validate never attending my undergraduate research showcases while traversing the country for Jessica's volleyball matches. Ingenuity, their rationale for why Jessica received a brand new vehicle for her 21st birthday, while I was gifted a gas station voucher. Tomorrow marked Jessica's debt-free celebration, an event conceived by my parents. They had extended invitations to family, her companions, and even some of our former instructors. The invitations proclaimed, "Celebrating Jessica's accomplishment," as though graduating medical school without debt was her individual feat rather than a consequence of our parents' monetary choices. "I must depart," I stated finally, gathering my bag. "Early shift at the hospital tomorrow." "Will you still attend Jessica's gathering?" Mom inquired, concern finally evident in her tone, not for me, but for how my non-attendance might impact my sister's momentous occasion. "I'll be there," I assured her, though the mere idea caused my stomach to churn. As I headed towards my car, my phone vibrated with a notification from Dr. Fleming. "Need to speak with you urgently about the Patterson Fellowship. Big news." I gazed at the screen, a frigid understanding enveloping me. My parents' bias wasn't merely unjust, it was on the brink of becoming publicly mortifying, and I was powerless to prevent what was imminent. My twin Jessica and I had followed strangely dissimilar trajectories from birth. I entered the world first. She arrived 6 minutes later. According to family legend, I was serene and attentive, while Jessica proclaimed her presence with robust, healthy cries. Perhaps that established the pattern for everything that ensued. Throughout our upbringing in Cleveland, Jessica was the extroverted twin, the one who effortlessly formed friendships and thrived in athletics. I was more reserved, more studious, dedicating hours to our local library, absorbing knowledge about everything from celestial bodies to animal life. Our parents were present at every one of Jessica's soccer contests and dance performances. My science fair triumphs merited a brief "Good job, Audrey," and a pat on the head. By high school, the dynamic was solidified. When we both declared our aspirations to enter medicine, our parents appeared delighted for Jessica. For me, there were anxious dialogues about the workload and my capacity to manage the strain. "Medical school isn't solely about intellect, Audrey," my father had cautioned. "It demands perseverance and determination. Jessica has consistently exerted herself more." The paradox was agonizing. Throughout undergraduate studies at Ohio State, I sustained a flawless GPA while holding a part-time job to manage expenses. Jessica grappled with organic chemistry and physics, necessitating costly tutors, which our parents willingly financed. When she needed to retake the MCAT, they covered the cost of a premium preparation program. When I scored in the 98th percentile on my initial attempt, they merely nodded and commented, "That's nice, dear." Despite everything, I never harbored resentment towards Jessica. She was my sibling, my twin, and I cherished her. She didn't instigate our parents' preferential treatment, she merely reaped its benefits. Occasionally, I even sensed she felt uneasy with their blatant favoritism, though she never voiced it explicitly. We were both admitted to the same medical school in Michigan, and for 4 years we pursued our studies together, providing mutual support during demanding rotations and rejoicing in each other's triumphs. I believed, perhaps at last, our parents would perceive us as equally proficient. Instead, they discovered novel methods to magnify Jessica's accomplishments while diminishing mine. When I was chosen to present research at a national convention, Jessica had, coincidentally, been awarded a community service accolade the same weekend. Guess which occasion our parents chose to attend? But everything shifted during our final year. When Dr. Vivian Fleming, a celebrated neurosurgeon, took note of my research on pediatric traumatic brain injuries. Under her guidance, I prospered. For the first time, I encountered someone who acknowledged my capabilities, who motivated me to surpass expectations, not in spite of my character, but because of it. "You possess a talent for research, Audrey," Dr. Fleming once remarked. "You discern patterns others overlook. That type of perception is innate." If only my parents could perceive me through her perspective. The morning preceding Jessica's festivity, I met with Dr. Fleming in her office. She was a remarkable woman in her 60s, with silver hair and discerning blue eyes that missed nothing. Her office walls were adorned with accolades, published articles, and photographs with medical luminaries from across the globe. "Audrey, have a seat." She gestured towards the chair opposite her desk. "I have remarkable news." My heart throbbed. For weeks, I had been anticipating news regarding the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, the most esteemed neurosurgical research placement in the nation. Only one graduating medical student nationwide would be granted it. "The committee has reached a verdict on the Patterson Fellowship," Dr. Fleming stated, her expression deliberately composed. I inhaled deeply. "They've selected you," she revealed, a wide smile spreading across her face. "Congratulations, Dr. Audrey Collins. You're heading to Baltimore." Jubilation, disbelief, and vindication washed over me in successive waves. The Patterson Fellowship, the zenith of achievement for any neuro researcher, mine. I'm speechless," I stammered. "You merited this," Dr. Fleming asserted firmly. "Your research on neurovascular regeneration following traumatic injury was pioneering. The committee was particularly captivated by your dual methodology, integrating surgical innovation with pharmacological intervention. The fellowship encompassed a substantial stipend, housing allowance, and most significantly, complete debt forgiveness. I would be debt-free, akin to Jessica, but through my own accomplishments, not parental bias." "There's more," Dr. Fleming continued, her eyes gleaming. "I've been invited to Jessica's celebration tonight. Your parents extended an invitation as a courtesy to faculty, unaware of our mentorship. I'd like to announce the fellowship news there, if you're comfortable with that." My stomach plummeted. "I'm uncertain, Dr. Fleming. It's intended to be Jessica's evening, and my parents might perceive it as an attempt to usurp her moment." Dr. Fleming's expression hardened slightly. "Audrey, I've observed your family dynamic over the past 2 years. I've witnessed your parents at hospital gatherings, overheard their conversations about both you and your sister. I comprehend your reluctance, but occasionally, recognition necessitates public acknowledgement to be truly valued." She was correct, of course. If my parents learned about the fellowship discreetly, they would discover a means to downplay it or attribute it to fortune rather than merit. "Okay," I conceded slowly. "You can announce it." As I departed her office, my phone vibrated with a text from Jessica. "Mom's going overboard for tonight. It's embarrassing. Wish she'd put this much effort into celebrating both of us graduating. See you there." I stared at the message, perplexed. It was the first instance Jessica had ever conceded our parents' disparate treatment. Before I could formulate a reply, another text arrived, this time from my mother. Don't forget business casual for tonight, and please let your sister have her moment. This is very important to her. The disparity between the two messages was striking. Perhaps I had misjudged Jessica all along, and perhaps tonight would unveil truths my parents had been evading for 26 years. Jessica's debt-free celebration was hosted at a lavish restaurant in downtown Detroit. My parents had reserved the entire rooftop terrace, an extravagance undoubtedly costing thousands. As I exited the elevator, I was welcomed by a sizable banner proclaiming, "Congratulations, Dr. Jessica," with no acknowledgement that there were, in fact, two Dr. Collins in the family now. I smoothed my navy blue dress and inhaled deeply. This was Jessica's evening, irrespective of Dr. Fleming's intended announcement. I wouldn't permit years of bitterness to jeopardize my bond with my twin. "Audrey!" Jessica spotted me instantly, detaching herself from a group of relatives to approach me. She appeared radiant in a silver cocktail dress, her blonde hair, identical to mine in hue, but styled in a fashionable bob, while I maintained my long hair, impeccably arranged. "Thank goodness you're here. Aunt Patty has inquired 5 times if I have a significant other yet." I chuckled despite my apprehension. "What did you respond?" "That I'm betrothed to medicine, but if she knows any eligible neurosurgeons, I'm accepting applications." Jessica linked her arm with mine. "Seriously, though, this is excessive. Mom invited half the medical school. Dean Wilson is here." I surveyed the congested terrace and indeed spotted the dean conversing with our father. Wow, they truly went all out. Too all out, it's humiliating. Jessica lowered her voice. And why solely for me? We both graduated. We both toiled relentlessly. The knot in my stomach loosened slightly. Perhaps Jessica was more cognizant than I had credited her for. "Audrey, Jessica." Our mother materialized, champagne flute in hand. "Jessica, the Hendersons have just arrived. You recall Thomas Henderson, the chief of surgery at Cleveland Memorial? You should greet them." She grasped Jessica's arm, effectively disengaging us, then glanced back at me. "Audrey, could you verify if the caterers have presented the gluten-free selections? Your cousin Beth is being finicky about her dietary restrictions again." And just like that, I was relegated to catering oversight, while Jessica was showcased before hospital administrators. Certain dynamics remained immutable. I was guiding waitstaff to the designated table when Dr. Fleming arrived. She appeared refined in a crimson pantsuit, commanding presence effortlessly. "Audrey," she greeted warmly, embracing me. "Are you prepared for our announcement?" "I'm unsure," I confessed. "The timing feels intricate." Dr. Fleming surveyed the gathering, observing the banner, the professionally adorned cake bearing solely Jessica's name, the slideshow of photographs predominantly featuring Jessica, with me occasionally visible in the periphery. "I perceive," she stated softly, "more intricate than I anticipated." Across the terrace, I observed my parents introducing Jessica to Dr. Margaret Wu, the chief neurosurgeon at Detroit Medical Center, where both Jessica and I had submitted applications for residency placements. My stomach constricted. Were they endeavoring to secure Jessica a position through personal affiliations? "Dr. Fleming." My father had noticed her and was now approaching, accompanied by my mother and Jessica. "What a privilege to have you join us. I understand you've engaged in some collaboration with Audrey." "Some collaboration?" Dr. Fleming arched an eyebrow. "Audrey has been my principal research associate for the preceding 2 years. Her contributions to our traumatic brain injury investigation were pivotal to its efficacy." My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't decipher. "How pleasant," my mother remarked vaguely. "Jessica has also been deeply immersed in neurosurgical research. In fact, Dr. Wu was just expressing her admiration for Jessica's application to her program." I felt a surge of indignation. Jessica hadn't undertaken neurosurgical research. Her emphasis was neuropsychiatry, a distinctly different domain. My parents were flagrantly misrepresenting her background, potentially jeopardizing my own prospects. Dr. Fleming's demeanor remained amiable, but I detected a steely glint in her eyes. Is that so? How intriguing. I was under the impression that Jessica's concentration was on psychiatric applications rather than surgical interventions. An uncomfortable silence descended upon our small group. My trap of hope was shutting down. This was not going to make anything better. The dinner segment of the evening commenced, with my parents positioned at the head table alongside Jessica, our grandparents, and Dr. Wu. I was assigned to a secondary table with cousins and family acquaintances, sufficiently proximate to overhear the dialogue, but not participate. We always envisioned Jessica destined for eminence, my father was conveying to Dr. Wu. Even in their youth, Jessica exhibited such tenacity. She's consistently been our ambitious one. Each syllable was a miniature dagger. I rearranged the food on my plate. Appetite vanished. Nearby, Dr. Fleming was seated with other faculty members, occasionally meeting my gaze with sympathetic glances. After dessert was served, my father arose and tapped his glass, soliciting attention. Thank you all for attending to commemorate our daughter Jessica's extraordinary feat. As many of you are aware, medical school is an arduous undertaking, and to emerge not merely with a degree, but debt-free, is genuinely exceptional. The attendees applauded courteously. Jessica appeared increasingly ill at ease. We're fortunate to have possessed the capacity to support Jessica throughout her academic journey, my mother supplemented, rising to join my father. We consistently believed in investing in her future because we were confident she would bring us pride. I gazed at my plate, scalding tears threatening to erupt. The phrasing was meticulous. They had invested in Jessica, not in both their daughters. The message was unequivocal. Actually, Jessica interjected abruptly, rising. I'd like to express something. She looked directly at me. This festivity feels lacking. Audrey and I both graduated with identical GPAs. We both toiled incredibly diligently and candidly. Audrey toiled more rigorously because she accomplished it without the support structure I possessed. A hush descended upon the assembly. My parents appeared dumbfounded. Jessica, my mother whispered, this isn't the appropriate juncture. It's precisely the appropriate juncture, Jessica insisted. I cannot accept commendation that excludes my sibling. It's unjust, and it always has been. My throat constricted with sentiment. After all these years, Jessica was publicly acknowledging the disparity. It was simultaneously vindicating and devastating. My father recuperated swiftly, his tone excessively jovial. Naturally, we're proud of both our daughters. Audrey has also performed admirably. But tonight is dedicated to celebrating Jessica being debt-free, which is a distinctive accomplishment. An accomplishment you facilitated, not one I attained, Jessica countered, her voice unwavering but resolute. The tension in the chamber was palpable. This was swiftly evolving into the scenario my parents had perpetually dreaded, their flawless family image fracturing in public view. Dr. Fleming selected that moment to rise. If I may contribute something to this discourse, she stated, her authoritative tone slicing through the murmurs. This appears to be an auspicious occasion to impart some intelligence regarding Audrey that many of you may be oblivious to. My parents exchanged apprehensive glances. Audrey's research on neurovascular regeneration has garnered her the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Fleming proclaimed. For those unacquainted, this is the singular most prestigious placement bestowed upon a graduating medical student nationwide. It encompasses complete debt forgiveness and a considerable stipend. Gasps and murmurs disseminated throughout the room. Dr. Wu was regarding me with renewed curiosity. My cousins were whispering excitedly. In fact, Dr. Fleming persisted, the selection committee explicitly referenced Audrey's groundbreaking dual-approach methodology, which she devised largely autonomously while balancing a comprehensive clinical rotation schedule. I've had the privilege of mentoring numerous promising physicians, but seldom have I encountered the degree of commitment and acuity that Audrey consistently exhibits. The room erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause, directed at me. Individuals were pivoting in their seats to observe me, smiling and nodding with deference. My parents remained immobilized, their expressions a convoluted blend of astonishment, perplexity, and dawning apprehension as they comprehended that their meticulously fabricated narrative concerning their daughters was publicly disintegrating. Jessica was beaming at me, no trace of envy in her demeanor. Dr. Fleming wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm delighted to announce that I've personally orchestrated for the residual of Audrey's medical school debts to be encompassed through our department's Merit Scholarship Fund, a decision unanimously ratified by the board in acknowledgement of her exceptional contributions to our research initiative. I was debt-free as well, and I had earned it. Following Dr. Fleming's proclamation, the celebration shifted markedly. Faculty members who had previously gravitated towards Jessica were now approaching me, inquiring about my research and extending congratulations on the fellowship. Several of my clinical supervisors recounted glowing anecdotes about my interactions with patients, which I hadn't realized they had even observed. My parents remained at their table, astonishment still conspicuous on their faces. They weren't merely digesting the news of my fellowship and debt forgiveness. They were witnessing the dismantling of the narrative they had erected concerning their daughters. The serene, self-reliant twin they had habitually disregarded was now the focal point of professional veneration. Jessica navigated her way to my side, champagne flute in hand. "Congratulations, sis," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "The Patterson Fellowship. That's phenomenal. Why didn't you inform me?" "I only discovered this morning," I elucidated, "and I didn't intend to eclipse your celebration." Jessica grimaced. This preposterous gathering was Mom and Dad's notion, not mine. I endeavored to convey to them it was excessive and unjust to you, but you comprehend how they become once they've resolved something. "You did?" I inquired, astonished. "Naturally I did." Jessica appeared wounded. "Audrey, I've consistently recognized they treated us disparately. I didn't comprehend how to rectify it without exacerbating matters." Before I could respond, Dr. Margaret Wu approached us. "Dr. Collins," she addressed me directly. "I was profoundly captivated by Dr. Fleming's exposition of your research. We should deliberate whether you'd contemplate conveying your work to our neurosurgery department in lieu of Johns Hopkins." I blinked in surprise. "That's exceedingly flattering, Dr. Wu, but—" "She's already accepted the Patterson," Jessica interjected, placing her arm around my shoulders proudly. "It's a singular opportunity. But you should be cognizant, my sister never undertakes merely one groundbreaking endeavor at a time. I'd wager she'll have another pioneering study underway within months of arriving in Baltimore." Dr. Wu smiled. "Well, upon completion of the fellowship, bear Detroit in consideration. We'd be privileged to have you." She nodded towards Jessica. "Both of you, in your respective specializations." After she departed, I turned to Jessica, bewildered. "You didn't have to do that. I know you aspired to remain in Detroit for your residency." "And I still can," Jessica affirmed. "But I won't accomplish it by permitting Mom and Dad to manipulate the circumstances, or by allowing you to forfeit prospects. That's not the individual I aspire to be." Across the room, I observed my parents finally rising from their table, advancing hesitantly in our direction. Their progression was sluggish, interrupted by guests who desired to converse about me, a novel experience that was manifestly unsettling for them. "Here they come," Jessica murmured. "Prepared for this?" "Not truly," I conceded. "Dr. Fleming certainly had some compelling remarks to articulate about you," my father stated when they ultimately reached us, his tone meticulously calibrated to sound proud while concealing his bewilderment. "The Patterson Fellowship. That's quite a distinction. Why didn't you apprise us you were even being contemplated for something so prestigious?" My mother inquired, a trace of accusation in her tone. Would it have mattered? I queried softly. You've made it abundantly evident where your patronage and interest reside. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. It's not equitable, Audrey, my father commenced. We've consistently supported both of you, my mother interjected hastily. Differently. We supported you both differently because you possess disparate requirements. Jessica shook her head. Mom, Dad, let's not engage in this evening, but we are going to have a genuine discourse about this soon. All of us. She bestowed upon me a meaningful gaze. No further pretense. Dr. Fleming materialized at my elbow, rescuing me from having to reply. Audrey, the dean desires a word, something pertaining to featuring your fellowship in the alumni publication. She smiled at my parents, her expression amiable but her eyes steely. You must be immensely gratified to have nurtured two such accomplished daughters, though I envision it's particularly satisfying to witness Audrey's diligence acknowledged, considering all she's surmounted. The emphasis on surmounted was subtle but unmistakable. My parents had the decency to appear abashed. Well, my mother articulated weakly, we've consistently recognized Audrey was exceptional too. Little, too late. The week following the celebration was transformative. News of my Patterson Fellowship disseminated throughout the medical community in Detroit, and abruptly, portals that had been sealed to me swung open. Former instructors who had granted Jessica extensions but rebuffed mine were now emailing to extend congratulations. Classmates who had scarcely acknowledged my presence during 4 years of medical school abruptly asserted close camaraderie. My parents, meanwhile, were endeavoring damage control. They had appeared at my apartment the day succeeding the gathering, bearing gift bags and feigned smiles. We've been contemplating, my father stated, as he positioned a diminutive box on my coffee table. With both of you graduating and embarking on your careers, we should procure you girls something distinctive. We acquired you this. Inside was a rose gold wristwatch, identical to the one they had presented to Jessica for her birthday 6 months prior. It's exquisite, I articulated, without reaching for it, though somewhat belated. My mother winced. Audrey, we comprehend you must feel disregarded occasionally, but everything we executed was because we were cognizant you could manage obstacles autonomously. Jessica necessitated greater assistance. That's a convenient narrative, I retorted, maintaining my voice composed. But it doesn't elucidate why you attended her presentations, but eschewed mine. Why you financed her MCAT preparation course, but instructed me to utilize complimentary online resources. Why you subsidized her living expenditures during medical school, but advocated I procure supplementary loans for mine. We solely possess so much capital, Audrey, my father protested. We were compelled to make determinations. Indeed you did, I concurred. And invariably, you selected Jessica. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. We cherish you both equally, she insisted. Perhaps you do, I conceded. But you haven't treated us equally, and wristwatches and belated acknowledgement won't alter that. The phone rang. Dr. Fleming, contacting to deliberate my impending relocation to Baltimore. I answered it gratefully, pivoting away from my parents' dumbfounded visages. Yes, I'm accessible to discuss the housing alternatives, I stated into the receiver. In fact, your timing is impeccable. 3 weeks later, I stood in my vacant apartment, the final boxes packed and poised for the moving company. Jessica perched on the windowsill, observing me tape up a concluding container of books. I still can't fathom your departing next week, she remarked. Detroit won't be the same in your absence. You'll be too engrossed with your residency to note my departure, I quipped, though there was veracity in it. We'd been inseparable throughout medical school, but our trajectories were finally diverging. Mine to Johns Hopkins, hers remaining at Detroit Medical. I keep reflecting on what Mom and Dad perpetrated, Jessica stated abruptly, Or didn't perpetrate, I suppose. All these years, I surmised I was the fortunate one because they bestowed greater heed upon me, but they were genuinely impeding me, rendering me reliant on their endorsement. I sat beside her on the windowsill. You didn't commit any transgression, Jess. I didn't execute sufficient righteousness either, she countered. I should have articulated myself sooner. She sighed. They're devastated, you know. Mom keeps weeping about how you must detest them. Dad's recounting to anyone who will heed about his brilliant daughter at Johns Hopkins, as though he personally subsidized your research. Let them, I stated, surprising myself with how negligibly it perturbed me now. Their endorsement no longer defines me. And it was factual. The incessant yearning for validation from parents who had never genuinely perceived me had ultimately subsided. Dr. Fleming's mentorship had illuminated what authentic support entailed, challenging me when I necessitated impetus, defending me when I required safeguarding, and perpetually discerning my potential without stipulation. So, what transpires presently? Jessica inquired. With us, I signify. I grasped her hand. We discover our own path forward, devoid of the rivalry they engendered between us. I'd appreciate that, Jessica smiled, squeezing my hand. Dr. Audrey Collins, Patterson Fellow. I'm immensely proud of you, sis. For the first time in years, I felt utterly serene. The trajectory ahead was arduous but unequivocal, and entirely mine to navigate on my own terms.